Hello, 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 guys. Welcome to this new edition of Mind Podcast. Yes, I know it's been a 3-4 week break between our last episode, but I was traveling across India, so and then that trip got extended. So, uski wajah se podcast nahi ho paya, but here we are back. And thanks for all the love you've been showing, all the Mind Makers videos that we've been doing, all the short videos. Please keep, sending your comments and feedback. But together, I have our returning champion, lawyer Nikhil Mehra, back with us, our friend at Mind Podcast, and someone whose perspective on current affairs, various issues I always look forward to. So, welcome to Mind Podcast, Nikhil.
Thank you, Aadit. Thank you. Great to be here again. You've got to promise me to squeeze in some cricket somehow. Huh?
Oh,
Whatever else is to
absolutely,
talk
we
about,
will.
we have
No,
to
no,
squeeze
no.
some cricket.
Okay, so here's how the podcast is going to be. We're going to talk about the current, various current affairs issues, including what happened to Salman Rushdie in the next 30-35 minutes. And then the last 10-15 minutes, we'll keep it absolutely about cricket. So we'll do that, and we'll end with recommendations. But initially, I thought, Nikhil, since we're going to talk about freedom of expression and literature and all this, कि वो पायदानी दे दूं कि विशेषज्ञ आज बोलने वाले हैं, because it seems like the experts on freedom of expression in the world have ceased to exist, right? Like that's how sad and contrived the debate has become. So, for people who've been living under a rock or have been hiding somewhere or have been on vacation, I'll just give you a perspective of what happened. On 12th August, about 4 or 5 days ago, a man called Hadi Matar stabbed Indian-born British-American novelist Salman Rushdie multiple times. He was about to give a public lecture at the Chautauqua Institute in Chautauqua, New York. It's like essentially a small town which is on the which is on the outskirts. It's on the east west side of New York, the extreme west. It's a very small community and everything. And the reason I amplify that is that Salman Rushdie had, everyone knows about what happened in 1989 when he wrote the Satanic Verses and the fatwa issued by Ayatollah Khomeini. Before that, there was the book ban in India. And we'll get into that in the debate. But it's been 30 plus years, more than 3 decades since that. And that fatwa or what the events of 1988-89 still continue to be behind Mr. Rushdie. I think he'd just taken up American citizenship a few years ago, and a few years ago he'd started leading somewhat of a normal life. But as we found out, unfortunately, it's like he was, there was nothing normal about this and stuff. And there was always a moving target on his back, unfortunately, because of what had happened. And this, curiously, attack was carried out by someone who's not even born there, who's not even lived through that. So, victim of propaganda or what, we'll discuss that. But Nikhil, initial thoughts, right? Like when we get into the whole freedom of expression and debate and reactions over Salman Rushdie, and we'll get into a few journalists and what they have said or what they've omitted. What are your initial thoughts? Like, will Mr. After all these years, we thought Mr. Rushdie was finally going towards a normal life, and it seems like there is nothing called a normal life now.
Yeah, I mean the long arc of fundamentalist memory, of extremist memory, he got caught on the far end of it. I mean, it's an incredible thing. Listen, I remember reading a few years ago that there was some sort of tacit understanding with Iran that the fatwa was no longer operative. I don't know. I remember reading this a few years ago. I'd not sort of done the research before this. And so I thought, that may be the reason why he himself must have been thinking that I'm kind of sort of in the clear now. But obviously, they've sort of ramped it up again. I do want to make one point. This doesn't seem to be a case of, a generally incited, angry Muslim who was suddenly exposed to the to the ideas that were considered blasphemous that Salman Rushdie had put in the book. But it does look like there's a geopolitical setting to this, which is that Iran put out a number of hits within American borders to persons that it considered hostile to its interests, including John Bolton and Salman Rushdie. So I think there may be more of a geopolitical context to this, but the problem is this: it's very easy to find a nut,
Hmm.
right? It's very easy to find one crazy man, and sadly, when it comes to Islam, it's easiest. That's the truth, right? I'm not saying that there aren't crazy fundamentalists on all religious fronts, but there is barely mention of this kind of incident and event in the context of other religions in the way in which this happens, right? The Islamic answer to this is they have constantly been pummeled militarily by other religions. So they look at American intervention or Israeli presence as really religious wars. You may be deeming them to be in the context of
Yeah.
superpowers and countries and in the context of current geopolitics, but they look at it in the civilizational sense of religious battles again, right? So that's where I think the world is. We hoped it had moved on. It has not moved on quite clearly. Uh, you would have thought that this would have come from someone in Afghanistan or some wacko in Syria who would have proposed this, or some kind of Al Qaeda remnant, or someone influenced by ISIS. There have been ISIS attacks in the states in the past, but for a regime to do it, that's the scariest implication in all of this.
Yeah. No. No. I'll bring you. I'll tell you why
I
I
want to
made
add
that
one more point out. I want to
Please.
add,
Go
and
ahead.
let's sort of be clear. We're seeing a series of the same events in India, not one, a series of them.
Hmm.
Before Nupur Sharma's comments, after Nupur Sharma's comments,
Hmm.
right? There is no faith in freedom of speech on that side.
Hmm.
This is their idea of a reasonable restriction. It is perfectly reasonable in the face of blasphemy to kill a person.
No.
That is the reasonableness standard that is set. Let's be crystal clear about that.
Here is what's shocking in all this, right? The reason I mentioned is when you just have to look at the responses to what when the fatwa was announced in 1989 or 89, and many people on the media side, how they came out strongly in support of Mr. Rushdie. You would think that in a in a social media generation, you will find more and more journalists, will find more and more, think tanks, institutions actually coming out in support of Mr. Rushdie. It's actually been the other way. Like there have been certain journalists who have deleted their tweets. I think Rana Ayub deleted a tweet. She expressed Mr. Rushdie, I hope she gets well soon, and things like that. And all these people are considered to be fighting, powers and things like that in the American media. I think even in US, when it comes to the freedom of speech of Mr. Rushdie, people are either beating around the bush or not talking about why Mr. Rushdie was attacked. He was attacked because there was a fatwa issued on his back, because he was deemed he was attacked by an Islamist mob in 1989, and that continues. And it seems like even that questioning is gone.
Listen, I don't know what your memory of this is. I have a suspicion you're a bit younger than me, so you don't remember this time. I remember it very distinctly, even though I was very young. I was about 10 years old when this ban came. I read this book when I think I was 14 or something, 14 or
Hmm.
15. The whole, this was a huge point of conversation at that time. And I'm sorry, you may be thinking there was support. There were a lot of people, a lot of intelligentsia, a lot of sort of very educated people in India who said, yeah, the ban is perfectly fine. We can't have
No, no,
religious
I didn't mean India. I meant in US.
I just wanted to make the point. See,
Yeah.
ignore Rana Ayub, because Rana Ayub is playing a very hard game. Her game is a
Yeah.
very tough game. It's very
Yeah.
tough being an Islamist in a liberal's clothing, right? So it's a very tough game where you have to be able to appease to those high principles, those high moral principles of liberalism. But in the
Yeah.
end, the interests that you appease are actually
Yeah.
Islamist interests. So you have a really difficult tightrope to walk at times. So,
Yeah.
she's blocked me a long time ago because obviously I don't suffer the same hypocrisy and I don't suffer fools. So there was always going to be a point of clash. But
Yeah.
she apparently tweeted only to say, I hope Salman Rushdie recovers.
Yeah.
Right? And she was browbeaten by hardcore Islamists saying, how can you even pray for the recovery of a blasphemer?
Yeah.
Right? This is more about the ideology at play and less about Rana Ayub. So
No,
you're
absolutely.
looking at it in terms of Rana Ayub's courage of her convictions. No, it's not about her courage of conviction. It's about the ideology that confronts her, that faces her. Let me be crystal clear today. I am scared a little bit to really speak out about these sort of blasphemous events because I've seen the number of beheadings that's happened in India. Yeah, let's be crystal clear about all of this stuff.
And that's
You
and
know,
that's a, that's a
you have a
telling
tiny
point.
Muslim population in America. We're talking about a population which is sub 2%, maybe around 1%, sub 2% in America at this moment in time, right? So these fears are not substantiated in the American liberal mind as yet.
Yeah.
They will become substantiated when these numbers rise, when these percentages change.
I think it's more than even that. I think it's what constituted as even debate over freedom of expression, freedom of speech in America. That itself is evolving as well. Because after the Salman Rushdie debate, I mean, the only person I think who's spoken out. I mean, there have been various people who have
No,
spoken
I
out, but
see. In fairness, I have seen a lot of. I put out a tweet saying I've seen a lot of performative, sometimes heartfelt odes being written to Salman Rushdie. But to me, Salman Rushdie is a low-lying fruit in the defense of freedom of speech.
I was
Everybody's
just
been
going to say
defending him for a
that.
long time. It's fine. You can defend this. If you really defend the right, go defend Anupul Sharma. You won't. And you know why you won't. You may well want to doctrinally, but you have fear. That's the truth. Right?
No,
And
no,
you
absolutely.
recognize that in India, you simply don't have the state capacity to enforce that freedom of speech.
Well, not even that. Do you even people who want to see freedom of speech is also on both sides, right? Even if people want to speak out in favor of one, they would want. Do they want only one-sided freedom of speech? Right? They can speak out in favor of what they also will have to take the other side. Right? What I'm saying.
One-sided is never freedom of speech. So
Exactly.
it's
That's
not
what I'm saying.
one-sided is not called freedom of speech. One-sided is called your. That's not even
Yeah.
exercising a liberty. That's a power struggle.
And you're
Only
absolutely right about Salman.
one-way street.
Yeah, and you're right about Salman Rushdie being a low hanging fruit because ये 30 years, 35 years पुराना issue है. And for the people on the left, Salman Rushdie's politics actually sort of aligns with them. So I've said this many times, right? Like one doesn't have to agree with his prose and his politics to defend his right to speech. And I mean, I don't know how many times you have to reinforce that a lot of people were like, oh, but Salman Rushdie said this about India and this. I was like, I don't care. I will disagree with him on if he has an uninformed opinion of or if I think it's an incorrect opinion on India, but that doesn't mean that I sort of don't talk about the attack that happened on him, and that's and what you said, right, that for the people on the left it's very easy to defend Salman Rushdie because he aligns with them on most issues
Yeah, but
except
you know
this
what
one.
this worldview is, Adit? For a lot of the West, India was exotic because within Indian
Hmm.
democracy, what you had was a full play of religion,
Hmm.
right? And I'm not saying it was only of Islam or only of Hinduism or only of Christianity. Religion was preserved within the Indian democratic structure as the principal superstructure around which you could evolve life. Your food choices were based on religion. So, therefore, laws relating to food had to be around religion. Your clothes choices were sometimes around religion. Your holidays are around religion. Your observances are around religion. Your symbols of what you wear day to day are around religion, right? As India is modernizing, it wants to move away from these overt expressions, right? So, what is happening along with that is Hinduism is asserting itself, I think, more than in the past, but Hinduism is also regressing, is also withdrawing its symbols in a much more aggressive manner than it used to in the past. So, that you don't want to be on the streets about absolutely everything. You don't want these symbols everywhere. Nationalistic symbols are starting to replace, right? And nationalism is a very scary word in the West because they've suffered the worst of nationalism. They don't understand that nationalism in the Eastern context has never had the same problems that nationalism has had in Europe, right? Because their borders were never clearly defined, their lines were never clearly defined, so their wars were always around the concept of nationhood. Whereas our notions of nationhood in this country and in the East in general have been much more benign,
Yeah.
right? So with that sort of replacement, they look at India now and look at it and say, right, suddenly you can't wear a hijab, and suddenly there are anti-conversion laws and they're being enforced. Suddenly there's a ghar wapsi happening. What the hell is going on? Does this mean so religion isn't having its full play like it used to? right? And so this is not the India they recognize. Whereas we should be, as Indians, pushing forward and saying, yes, we want religion to not have its full play, right? When I say this, I am quite cognizant of the fact, and I contest this all the time with hardline Hindus, that your religious sensitivities also need to be shut down and put into your own homes. They can't be brought out into the public sphere all the time the way you are.
And,
ये नहीं so but that is being replaced by national symbols, right? And they don't like it. So this is it's a very predictable critique, it's a very easy critique, and it's a ahistoric critique. And if you ever want to answer a Salman Rushdie critique to that, you literally have to pick up Naipaul and answer him with Naipaul.
it's I think Naipaul and Salman Rushdie is the perfect comparison, because both have a sort of a similar standing in the literary circuit in the West, and almost are two sides of different views on India or how to interpret Indian recent history. But I think what you said is, I think, a fantastic term. This is not the India they recognize, right? It doesn't mean that this is the India that was. I think that the India that has emerged, in the last few decades or the last few years, was an India whose sentiment had sort of been subdued, forcibly, not sort of, they did not have adequate representation at national stage with people, with leaders, and so forth. And that is the India that's coming forward. And so I was actually listening to a podcast, and I'm not going to name that journalist because I don't want to give him publicity, but he was completely, essentially, a disillusioned person and has been ranting about Modi and BJP for a long time. And he has come up to this conclusion in the last 2 years that instead of countering ideas, you have to blame the voters. The voters are only at fault. He's like, "Pehle jo vote." I was like, wow. So this is exactly why Mr. Modi will always win. That now, rather than coming up with ideas.
You know why that happens? It happens because it is... See, if you try to break down every answer in terms of ideology and ideology only, this is how you talk. Right?
Or elections.
Here are the numbers. The first thing, when you say you have to blame the voters, all right, blame the voters. No problem, blame the voters. But first, set out a profile for the voters. And please don't be so dull so as to just say Hindu voters and that's it. I don't look beyond that.
Yeah.
Right? You've got to look beyond that. Why? Because the BJP, even in 2014, during Modi's first majority, was still not a party capable of obtaining rural votes.
Absolutely agree.
5 years of whatever programs he conducted, and frankly, people like me have been criticizing them, saying you're just too socialist. Your government spending on this stuff is so high, and your control over the economy on the private side is still so strong. Right? This has been my critique. But what is the effect? The rural vote of the BJP jumps by 12% in 2019, even higher actually. Now the rural voter is not voting Mandir Masjid. The rural voter is simply voting Pani, Bijli, Ghar, etc. Now you keep coming up with these critiques from the Congress and its policy analysts and policy wonks, saying, putting one pole doesn't mean that you brought electricity to that village. Fair enough. You may be right in your actual critique of the facts, but there's a point of hope, and Modi represents hope to these people. What that hope is, आज मेरे neighbor को घर मिला, अगले term में मेरे को मिलेगा. That kind of thing. So even if you want to blame the voter, are you now going to blame the voter for self-interest that pertains to actual obtaining of public goods that they should have obtained a long time ago during independent India's history, which they're only receiving after 75 years? Are you going to actually blame them for that? Because the problem for most of these people is they're also left-wing on economics.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So they would otherwise be praising to the skies. I mean, they will take a policy like Manrega, right? Because it increases wages and say, wow, this is phenomenal. But they will not look at a jam and say, this is good. Whereas Manrega by itself was leaky without jam. And jam, when you add it in, when you add in that Jandhan and Aadhar and all of that, you have actually promoted more entrepreneurship in the second tier, third tier towns and rural areas. And you have actually provided public goods that did not exist prior. Right? So that's that's the vote share increment. That's what it's talking about. That's what it's talking about. The other thing I want to talk to you about, they say blame the voters. Fine, blame the voters. Which voters are you going to blame? right? Because all of these people will also proudly wear on their badge, on their sleeve, that they're feminists. The Bihar election last time around was one of the tightest elections in a long time, right? If you look at the analysis on the Bihar election, Modi literally wins that election after 4 p.m., 5 p.m. on every voting day. Why? Because rural women come out to vote.
Yes.
Now, if you're a feminist and you believe women can make their own choices, would you not be looking at this trend and saying there's something going on which is positive, not negative, positive,
Absolutely.
right?
And
You look,
there is
you look at,
data. Sorry,
go
go.
on.
No, no, finish your point. No, 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 no. I was going to add to that, and before that, that there is data. We did a podcast with Nikhil Mehra on this, who has written a fabulous book on the new BJP, and he said there's data that people like Samajwadi Party or RJD and stuff, the men, the rural men have voted more for those parties, and rural women have actually voted more for the BJP. So if you are a feminist, you would actually, I remember Pranav Roy used to have these debates where he said, "Oh, if the more men come out and vote, BJP will win." Now they don't say that if more rural women come out and vote, the BJP is more likely to win, right? Because that puts the whole narrative in a tailspin because the
No, no, no. The narrative goes in a tailspin first and foremost because you had the best narrative that they used to possess was you're an upper caste party, you're a Brahmin Baniya party, that is dead, right? So the
Yeah.
caste used to be the highest point of morality within Indian commentary, right? That if something is imbalancing the caste equation or
Yeah.
is retaining the old imbalance of caste equations, that is inherently bad. And therefore the BJP was bad because it was an upper caste party. Now that's been decimated. Dalit vote is maximum there. SC/ST vote is maximum to the BJP. What are you going to say now?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
blame the voter. Blame the voter is a great game to play, but you will lose that game.
You will lose.
If you do a
Yes,
proper
absolutely.
profile check of the voter, you will lose that game.
No, and you're absolutely right. The lazy analysis is like, okay, BJP is a party of the north and the west, but then conveniently ignore Karnataka and Telangana, which have given them more than 30 Lok Sabha seats, which is more than
No,
10% of
yes,
what.
listen, this north and the west is rubbish. Just look at Modi's popularity in the northeast, your seven sisters.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of
Is there
25
another
MPs.
prime minister that has brought the northeast front and center into focus as a integral part of India like this man? You've got to be joking with me, north and west, north and west. Of course,
No,
north and
no.
west, there are a huge amount of seats there. North and west matters, yeah. But the northeast is voting for him the way it's never before.
No, no, and the funniest thing is North and West, like Bengal, Odisha, Telangana, Karnataka, and Northeast. If you just add those five, that's close to 100 seats that BJP NDA won last time.
There
And
you
I'm like,
go.
what are you saying? Like, or at least close to 80 or 90. My point being, so this is the whole contrived debate. But just to sort of bring, take a step back, and we'll get into India in 1 second. I want to bring one point back on Rushdie, the whole debate we made, and the whole discussion about whether what you said, that he's about leading a normal life and so forth. Now, in 1998, they said that the government of Iran tried to step away from the fatwa, and then in 2017 they said no, no, it's not been revoked and things like that. But you said that, like we were talking, that the whole debate around US was ki ye sab, now this will not be enforced. I think what shocked a lot of Americans and what shocked a lot of people is where this attack happened. Right? It was not like he was making some controversial speech in somewhere, or there was a
Please tell me
proclamation.
why it shocked them. Why did that shock them? Please tell me this because it's not as if Islamist attacks have not happened on American soil in the recent past.
There is absolutely, but there is somewhat of a.
Man, it's a
I'm
violent
struggling for a right
society, it's a
word, but
violent
there is.
country. There's an attack of some sort or the other in America all the bloody time. I don't know why they get surprised by the character of one attack over the other.
I think
Violence is not
there was a.
American TV all the time. I firmly, I lived in America for 6 years in my 20s, right? Uh, Mid 20s to my early 30s. I lived in the States. I lived in the States when I was a kid. I studied, I was in Seattle for 3 years. Uh, and I genuinely felt that I was exposed to more violent thoughts, more aggressive sort of behavior being normalized in the US than I am in any other society.
No, I mean, yes, I would not deny that at all.
And,
But I
and let
think
me
there
and
is,
let me add to that. Let me add to that. Delhi is sort of North India has a problem as well. There's a genuine problem with aggression being lauded. It's also softening. My view is it's softening. Uh,
no, it could be. I'm not entirely denying that phenomenon. I think the shock was somehow because there was this very arrogant attitude towards ki ye to bhai, first of all, I hate this term that they use in US, first world, third world. But there was this attitudinal problem where a lot of people were like, ki ye to bhai third world problems hai. Aisa US mein nahi ho sakta, stabbing over things like this. But it happened. And that's so I think the issue here is that there is sort of the American arrogance कि ऐसा this can't happen on American shows, hereby not looking at the violent attacks that have taken place in US, be it gun violence or be it other violence.
And there was a
And
guy sitting on top of a high-rise building in Las Vegas shooting into the open crowd. What are they
yeah,
talking about? There isn't a kind of shooting incident that doesn't happen in America. It's just
yeah,
that
yeah,
they feel like ye hamare wale hain. These are white guys or even black people, even black violence. Like these are ours. We get this because this is within our society. They don't get the other thing that's happened because they still maybe haven't internalized that there is violence from other communities as well. They'll
absolutely.
internalize it over time, and then they'll realize that this is also one of ours.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, and how to deal with it, right? I think the all the real problem is they don't know how to deal with the whole thing, right? Because
No, you can't.
initially,
See, I'll tell you why you can't. I'll tell you why you can't. There is a certain othering based on ideology. It's actually a logical othering, right? You remember the Boston shootings, Boston bombing,
the
the
Boston
marathon,
Marathon
right?
bombing, right?
Right. That was also Islamist. That was fundamentalist Islamist as well, right? Now they looked at that immediately as an act of terror. White violence, lone wolf violence, black on black violence, or black lone wolf gun violence, they don't look at acts of terror. Those are domestic problems. They see them as domestic problems. They understand them better because they see those arising from within their society. What this is, for example, what the attack on Salman Rushdie or the Boston bombings or that one that happened in Miami just before while the Trump first election campaign was going on, I think 2016 or something. These they see as outside ideologies penetrating their society, right? And that comes back to the idea that they have a very small Muslim population, so they've not seen Islamic violence, and for that matter, so there is a let me even it out by saying there's another trend that's emerging, right? They look at caste, for example, as an outsider problem, right? In caste amongst Hindus, but that's starting to emerge through stories within San Francisco, within the Bay Area, within Silicon Valley, right? Eventually, once they have enough understanding of it and they have enough uh, statistical data on it, because they are at least fair in being precise, they will internalize it and realize this is also one of our problems. That's why
Yeah,
the shock for Hadi Matar, right? That is why the shock for this guy.
yeah.
But once they've internalized that these things do happen in the US, there are populations where these things are motivations. There are causes for motivations for this kind of violence. They will internalize and realize there's no reason to be shocked because this is as normal as a white man going nuts with a gun in his hand, with an AR-15 in his hand.
No, and you actually raised a very important point about the whole caste debate, right? Because I read this excellent analysis this morning that one of these days when the U.S. Academics or the powers to be actually sit and analyze caste in companies and stuff, they'll also realize that the caste bias in the academia that is preparing this report and how unrepresented it is in the academic level is like that's when I want to see what do a lot of Indian American academics who are jumping up and
But
down
they have
about
an
this.
academic answer for that. That is subaltern academia. You can't
Huh.
you can't mix up the voice of the oppressed, right? The oppressed get to have a soul voice. They
But
already
but
have a structural answer for that.
They do, but it won't work at that level if America actually internalizes this, like what you said. But we'll have to say
Well,
that's
let's see.
another
Let's see.
facet.
ESG is going to get bigger and bigger. Let's see if caste becomes one of the totems on which ESG comes to rest. If it does,
Yeah,
then let's see. I wouldn't
yeah,
assume
and
too much.
then and Indian Americans, let's see what positions they take. Because again, there is another complex ideology to that. Like if you talk about, it's not just an issue with the Hindu Americans, right? There is also the Sikh American communities, because there is casteism that happens there too, right? So what do? Do you just limit it to Hindus, or do you talk about that? Because a lot
I
of
see.
them,
You've lived there a lot longer. I wanted to ask you. I did not, in whatever Indian American communities I saw in America, right? And let's be crystal clear. My experience is limited to Seattle, San Francisco, and New York, New Jersey area. These are at least two of these. Actually, all three or four are fairly Indian centric. Like there's large Indian American populations. New York, New Jersey, San Francisco, even Seattle, because of Boeing, has a reasonable amount of Indian population. Right? I had no concept of caste when I interacted with these people. Not because
yeah.
obviously I have that advantage that I would be at sight and by my name assumed to be upper caste, but I didn't see it in their own interactions either. Right? I just
No, it
didn't see
isn't.
it.
So I haven't seen it either, and my experience has been in the southern part of United States, Texas area, and then I've been quite a bit to the eastern side or the western side, and I haven't seen. I have friends across. I think the whole discussion is not even about whether it exists between people to people contact. They just want to somehow make it in the IT field, in the software field, and somehow go. That is the sole sort of target. That's why you see Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, and that being sort of targeted. They are not talking about other
Hang on,
companies.
hang on. Is this possibly because of Indian domination there right now?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Every major Silicon Valley company, the top guy is in
Yeah.
India right
Well, not even the top domination. See, in the last 3 or 4 years, a lot of people have taken up managerial positions in Apple and so forth. So, it could be a result of that. There could be multiple factors, within that. So, not just that. There is another thing you're discounting. Academic admissions, right? Because Indian Americans had a disproportionate admission into Ivy League universities. So now they are trying to sort of do that you have to distribute, even amongst Indian Americans, you have to have a proportionate distribution about caste and things like that. That is the ultimate goal. That's what they're trying to do, and it's not going to work.
Well, it may work, it may not work. I don't know. But I do notice one thing. Uh, the assault, if you may want to call it that, on Indian Americans seems to be in academic work and this academic attempt, possibly even tending towards legislative attempt. Uh, but unlike, say, Asian Americans who are actually facing street violence, man. I mean, there's no dearth of actual physical violence against Asian Americans on the streets. There've been more than a few cases now, which are pure racial hatred cases, and a lot of them are for some reason black on Asians, black men assaulting Asian American men, right? And I don't. It's been. I got it. I understood it was happening during COVID. That was one part of it, but it's still sort of continuing. So what that kind of indicates to me is that academia may be attempting to create sort of this oppressor-oppressed narrative and import it from India into and import sort of Indian structures and apply them across Indian American communities in the US. But that has not filtered through to the street, that idea, because possibly the street doesn't see it, right? But the street sees something problematic with Asian Americans. It's very distressing to see because Asian Americans are another phenomenally successful and peaceful community.
Yeah.
You don't get Asian American shooters and killers. You don't get Indian American shooters and killers. That stuff doesn't happen, right? But you get them dominating at the top. And maybe that's where this sort of ache is coming, because wokeism or sort of what is happening in terms of this open talk of socialism, it is a total power play for redistribution, right? So you need to
Absolutely.
redistribute. And if you need to redistribute, you need to take from the haves, and these are the haves. The problem with their original theories, as they stood, was you can't look at an Asian American or an Indian American and try to discount them as minorities, because now you start redefining minorities and say, well, for the academic field, they are not minorities. For admissions purposes, they are not minorities. For the number of visas that are being issued, they are not minorities, right? Because American companies want Indian workers. There's just no dispute in that. That's why the number of H-1Bs that get allocated to India is disproportionately high. It's insanely high. I mean, that was
But,
the controversy reason in
no,
between.
but that is also a factor of how many Indian American students come, right? So the H1Bs are actually directly proportional to that. And the other problem so that's another problem, right? So Indian Americans get the H1Bs, but the process from
So
H1
what I
to a
was
green
driving
card.
at, Adit, is once you've decided you need to redistribute and you need to take from these guys, you can't do it in your original frameworks of calling them minorities because they are minorities in your original frameworks. They are immigrants in your original framework. So you play up these immigrant stories, right? So then you're stuck because the successful immigrant stories would be Indian Americans, would be Asian Americans. So how do you take from them eventually? How do you take from them? And I think importing this idea of caste may be one way of saying, all right, let's start depriving you as well.
Where unfortunately, and where the political divide is, and where Indian Americans are sort of getting screwed, is if there are Republicans in power, the process from there, say from there to go to from a work visa to a green card, that gets a little difficult. And what Trump did with H1 and H4 laws when he was in power, that was hugely problematic. When the Democrats come to power, this discussion start at an academic level. They have no issues with H1 to green cards or H4 to green cards and so forth. So Indian Americans themselves have to find a narrative and find a voice. The difference is they have not spoken up as a community because वो activism का instinct है भी नहीं, right? यहाँ पे it's the whole concept between Indian Americans here is 8 to 5 काम करो, घर जाओ, have a house in the suburbs, and retire once you've done your 30-40 years in service, right?
A
There is
lack
no
of activism. In fact, whatever Indian American activism I've seen, it actually is to attack the community. That's what I've seen.
Yes, and there is a bit of a confusion also within Indians in India in terms of how to approach this, right? So there are two communities here. There are the Indian American communities and there is the Hindu American community. So I would count myself in the former community because I do relate to a lot more issues in India. I talk about India, I talk about politics in India, I actually vote in India, right? But there is people who are born and raised over here, born to Indian parents, and they are Hindus. They're practicing Hindus. So you can call them Indian Americans, but essentially they're American citizens who have, ties to India and are, practice Hinduism and stuff. And their approach, they don't care about what election or what issues are happening in India, right? So I think there also has to be a multi-sided approach in how Indians expect certain things. So Indian Americans will take positions that are pro-India, right? And because their knowledge of India, Hindu Americans.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. I see what you mean, because I think then what flows from that is that India as a country will possibly stand in defense of what you call Indian Americans and possibly not of Hindu Americans. Because Hindu Americans are fighting within the rubric of that society itself. They are internalized completely, and they have chosen their own narrative there.
No, and that's how it should be, right? They're born and raised here. I don't blame them.
Absolutely.
Why should you confuse the kids? So I mean, I don't mean it as a point of differentiation or even for. It's just. It's the reality, right? There are two realities of America, and it's fine. I think both are acceptable realities. But when people deal with one or the other, they just need to know what perspective is coming. So you cannot confuse support of a Karan Johar movie in India or RRR getting a huge blockbuster opening in America to be like, "Arey, we will hope that they will also stand by India's strong stance about buying Russian oil." There are two completely different things. No, two completely different things, right? So you will find, but I unfortunately I find a lot of confusion in the discussions and stuff. But we'll have to expand this at a later time. We are getting to the last 15-20 minutes, and as I promised our viewers and Nikhil, we'll switch gears and go towards our favorite sport, cricket. and talk a little bit about that. One thing before Nikhil we get into cricket is I am amazed by the rise of one man in list A cricket. His name is Chiteshwar Pujara. I don't know if you've seen the
Yeah, yeah, I've
batting
seen it.
that he's been doing.
I've seen it. Yeah, listen, I saw all that, and my first reaction: how shit is county cricket, man? How bad must the
Yeah,
pitch be?
I was just going to tell you that.
It must be.
Like,
You remember the 90s? We used to call them pie chuckers. Must be fucking pie chuckers all over the place. He's batting at 170 strike rate at times. It's ridiculous. Please, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I don't.
yeah,
Must be those
exactly.
small county grounds as well. Really small
No,
county
it's
grounds
actually
somewhere.
not very small. Also, where he's playing,
Yeah, yeah,
but it's just
they've all
the
changed now. They've
bowling.
all upgraded now. They've all upgraded.
So
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I just don't buy it. I find it very hard to buy.
I know, but I was saying 173, 150 balls and 130 balls, and I'm like, huh? What is happening?
Yeah, 174 or 131. Man,
But
that's a proper hit.
I still think he might be a better number three for India in ODIs than Virat Kohli right now.
No, no, no,
And
no.
if no,
No, no.
I'm saying it facetiously.
I don't know. No,
But
no, no. I'm sorry. You may be saying it facetiously, but because of Virat's situation, I have to actually address it seriously because this is not a laughable proposition anymore. It's just not
yeah,
as laughable. It's not a valid proposition, but it's
yeah.
not a laughable proposition anymore.
So, but coming
So
back to
I'm
cricket,
more
right?
worried than all of this. All of this doesn't matter. I have a genuine fear cricket's dying. It's going. At least the cricket as I know it is going. The concept of greatness as I knew it is finished. It's over. I think
Like,
you have maximum this generation and at most one more generation, which will have a proper shot at test match records, which will have maybe a shot at ODI records, and that's it. We're done after that. The concept of time, which was the greatest thing about cricket, that you could be good for 15 minutes and not make a difference to a match. Right? You could be elite for 15 minutes and it makes no difference to a match. Is going to disappear because T20 cricket, if you're elite for 15 minutes, you win the match.
No,
Right?
you
So
only need to be elite for 15 minutes.
yeah. So we've got to. I see. As I see it, I'm genuinely worried. I think cricket, as I understood it, the concept of greatness, the concept of what constituted the sport, is going to die in my lifetime. I hope it wouldn't happen in my lifetime, but I think it's going to happen in my lifetime.
And you bring up an important point because I've had this debate with a lot of people. They said, "Oh, what is wrong in cricket? If cricket is being a franchise sport, so is football." I'm like, "Yes, but footballers don't play different format internationally. It's
That's
the
right.
same
That's right.
format. They're playing it in franchise as they're doing internationally. So I have
Yeah,
no
so
problem if
county is that kind of franchise, right? County is that franchise. So
exactly,
they play the 4-day game.
yeah,
Ranji
absolutely.
is that
But
franchise. They play the
But
4-day game.
you have to let me play devil's advocate here, Nikhil. And you and I are cricket romantics. We've talked about Test cricket till the cows come home, so to speak. Do people really have that kind of time in this day and age to spend 5 days to watch a
No,
Test match?
I'm sorry. Why does it matter? Why I don't understand revenue models that require eyes to be glued to all 6 hours of a test match.
No, I don't
I
think
love
revenue
test cricket.
models.
I
Yeah,
love
but no,
test
my
cricket.
point.
I love
No, my
watching
point
it.
is not
It's
about revenue models. My point is not about revenue models. I think Test cricket should be subsidized. Test cricket is our yojana. ICC should treat it like a government scheme and should subsidize it till eternal. I'm talking about people in the stadium, right? Because cricket is only fun if people are in the stadium, any sport. And if you look, except India, Australia, and England, मैं वेस्ट इंडीज की मैं मैचेस देख रहा था फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल दिस नॉनसेंस दैट बीसीसीआई has perpetrated that everywhere India goes all games should be catered to when Indian TV viewers watch needs to stop. I was watching West Indies में T20 सुबह 9 बजे हो रही थी at 9 in the morning, right? When India was touring West Indies last week, right? Who the hell is going to wake up at 8:30 in the morning and go and watch them? And let me give a contrary example. NFL has games in London, 3 or 4 games every single year. The American football plays in London. They start at 8 in the morning, American Standard Time. In America, football is watched at 12 p.m. or after because it was said that you go to church, you come back, and then you watch football, right? But when they're playing games in Europe or Mexico City, they're playing in their time zone. So people in London don't have to come and watch at 10 in the
No,
evening.
I think that's perfectly logical because the stadium environment is so important, as you said. People are going to only come to those stadiums at the time at which people generally come to a stadium. They're not going to come at bloody 9 in the morning.
And you will not believe, Nikhil. If you look at, so I get both the feeds here, right? I can stream through a couple of websites the Indian feed also, and I was listening to the Indian feed and I was comparing it to the West Indies feed, the American feed that we get here, right? And one is with white noise and one is without that noise. One is the stadium noise, right? It is sad. If you listen to the feed without the stadium noise, what we have reduced to cricket in other countries to comply with Indian standard time is so freaking sad.
Yeah. I won't contest that point. But on Test cricket, the India South Africa series that we lost to one was a fantastic series. I loved that series,
Fantastic.
and they were reasonable crowds. I mean, we've also got to understand that these are smaller countries. They've also had economic crises. Some of them, it's difficult. Boss, the Sri Lanka Australia tour right now had decent crowd,
Yeah.
and they were fun Test matches. They were really fun Test
Oh,
matches. They were really fun
excellent.
ODI matches. That was a good series overall.
Not just Sri Lanka. Like I hated the.
Pakistan, Australia had sellout crowds throughout, and it had to because Australia was coming after decades for the first time. But
Yeah,
sellout
yeah.
crowds.
No, but I mean their pitches were horrendous. So, but my point is that India. So there are two things that ICC need to do, I think, and this needs to happen. One, they have to there should be an ICC regulator that actually regulates the pitches for Test cricket. I think we need to go beyond the point where each country has its own, sort of things, because they have to produce result-oriented games. If I don't care if they're spinning tracks or fast bowling tracks or something, the pattas that were on display in Pakistan, Australia in the first Test match, they cannot
But
work.
I don't agree with you because I think home advantage should stay. I think
No,
that
no, no.
should
Home
make
advantage is fine. Home advantage is fine. Yeah,
No,
but
it's not. It's
this.
not. What you're saying is it'll make cricket very monochromatic. I enjoyed that. So go win on a patta, yeah. Go try winning on a patta.
Maybe.
Pakistan would have actually banked the idea that even on a
Hmm.
patta they can beat Australia. It's just that the
They can
spinners
beat it.
didn't work out as well as they hoped. And
Maybe.
Usman Khwaja
Yeah.
was fantastic. He was fantastic in that tour.
That is, yeah. And the second point, and I'll come to you in a second. The second point, I was like, you have to have a just like ICC shares revenues with countries for, World Cup or something. Share some revenue for subsidizing test match cricket sales. Open it up for students. Open it up for free for people to come and watch.
Okay, I've seen days on which they do that, and crowds obviously swell because of that. So you're talking about aspects of Test cricket that honestly I'm fairly illiterate on. So I don't know how the revenues get shared. I don't know all of those things very well,
Yeah.
right? But what I do stand by is I genuinely think our problem is not that the ICC will not have an FTP with Test cricket in it. I just think the talent pool is going to drain away.
Mm.
So, and let's be even more fundamental about this. There is no Test cricket without a fantastic pool of fast bowlers,
Yes.
right? And fast bowlers, if they're going to make 10x bowling 4 overs in a match,
Hmm.
right? And to me, T20 batting skills may have transferred into Test cricket,
Hmm.
right? You're batting fast, sometimes to your own detriment, frankly. Sometimes
Hmm.
to your own detriment. And that is why I can't wait for the South Africa England series. I mean, this is going to be fun.
Yeah,
This is going to be
absolutely.
fun. Dean Elgar has come out and he's made certain comments saying, this sort of over aggressive brand of cricket, you will fail more times than you will succeed. Right? That's what his view of all of this is. Right?
Oh,
So
and he's somehow vindicated. England have.
the point that
Oh,
I was
sorry,
trying
go
to
on.
make
Yeah.
the point I was trying to make is that bowling skills from T20 cricket do not necessarily translate into Test cricket. In fact, they rarely do. The slower ball has very little meaning in Test cricket.
Hmm.
Right? The slower bouncer has very little meaning in Test cricket. You've got to bowl good line length and seam and swing in Test cricket, which has no space in T20 cricket, because if you're bowling line and length in T20 cricket, you're disappearing.
Hmm.
Right? So they are, for bowlers, it's completely diverse skill sets. Look at the number of spinners India is producing who are left arm spinners whose only skill is to dart the ball into the legs of the batsman.
Absolutely. Uh, Absolutely right about it. By the way, pardon us, guys, for the last 30 seconds. The video kind of froze. But what Nikhil was saying, what you heard about the left arm spinner is true. What I was saying that Dean Elgar was justified because if you look at the scorecard this morning of South Africa, England, South England is 116 for six. And Henrik Nortje,
Wait, no, it's just the first innings. England don't play. The first innings doesn't count with England anymore. It's the second
no, no,
innings
no,
that
no. But yeah, absolutely. But that's not why I meant the thing. Like Bairstow, Johnny Bairstow was playing so well, right? On a wicket that was moving, he left about a foot between bat and pad, and Henrik Nortje bowled him. Right now, Nortje had not had a good IPL, but he comes back, goes for a
can I
few.
tell you something
But
about this baseball rubbish? Did you watch those chases? I watched those
I
chases because
did,
they were in the vacation, right? They were in my vacation.
yeah,
Man, New Zealand bowled rubbish. I was
absolutely.
stunned at how badly they kept bowling short, either outside off or leg to Bairstow. Bairstow just kept hiking it.
And Root, Root
And
was cutting them, and Bairstow was hooking them.
and how bad was our bowling in that test match? In that fourth
Pathetic.
innings?
Pathetic.
Abysmal. That is the kind of situation in which I look at Jadeja and I cannot tolerate the fact that he's the one. Ashwin would have given you more wicket-taking deliveries in that on that final day than anybody else.
The only thing more annoying than that was Ravi Shastri in the Sky Sports commentary box justifying this theory because he has to defend Virat Kohli till the cows come home, saying, "I support this. I support Jadeja here, boss. You have to look at the game, the context, and things like that." And I'm like,
No,
and
wait,
Ravi.
he has to justify himself also. No, he was one of those who was picking Jadeja over Ashwin all the time.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, and Ravi Shastri is actually a treat to listen to if you listen to the 100 commentary. But I can't bear to watch the 100.
No,
So
you know what? I think his stint as coach has made him a better commentator for sure. He
absolutely,
talks he talks more logic now.
no, and
He
I
had
think
become
Sky.
he had become very monochromatic as a commentator.
Okay,
Everything
I'm
tracer bullet, this, that, and that's all. I mean, there was no
no,
real
I'm going to
analysis
I'm
about
going to be brutally trolled for this, but I think the Sky Sports commentary box does that to you. Like if you sit for 6 hours with Nasser
it.
Hussain, Michael Atherton, Michael Holding, and
Yeah,
others,
they
yeah,
ask good questions.
yeah,
Personally, they ask good questions.
as opposed to Murli Karthik, Deep Das Gupta, and Anjum Chopra, I think your tendency to do informed commentary is going to be a little better.
No, and also sitting with all of them, with those Indian commentators that you mentioned, under the Chhatra Chhaya of its BCCI, if you step an inch away from what your given agenda is, you're gone. Like I happened to
Yeah, yeah.
Harsha Bogle, right? So
Unfortunately. And
irony
Harsha is
is a
talented.
important factor in bad Indian commentary.
No, absolutely. And Harsha, keeps it entertaining still because he knows he plays around the line sometimes. But these others are to matlab, they are to BCCI what Digvijay Singh is to Rahul Gandhi, unfortunately. So
Speaking of Rahul
that,
Gandhi and the Congress, I'm a Manchester United fan, and being a Manchester United fan right now, I now know what it must feel like being a devoted Congress voter.
really.
The sheer hopelessness of it all.
So then, who do you think is the Cristiano Ronaldo in Congress?
I don't know. Cristiano Ronaldo today is a liability, right? He's a liability. So you can
Yeah.
take anybody who was a high performer. For me, in the Congress, although he's left now, Cristiano Ronaldo, the Congress for a long time will always be Kapil Sibal. I'll never regard after zero loss theory. I'll never regard anyone else. And here's the
Huh.
sad bit: had he not gone as far as zero loss, I think they actually had a good case to make because there is no doubt 1.76 lakh crore was also absolute bullshit.
Yeah. But the problem is the solution to 1.76 lakh crores was not removing 1.76 from the first three numbers and keeping the remaining. That's what they indulged in. But fantastic.
That's
Before,
that's
sorry,
another issue to discuss at some point in time because there were some
absolutely.
very bad things that happened around that time that I don't think the Congress is entirely to blame for. Some things that the Supreme Court did at that time were terrible. Terrible.
No, no, maybe that's the next discussion we should have about that. But it's a fascinating sort of thing. कि activism कहाँ से शुरू हुआ था, and maybe 2012 was a watershed moment for that also, in terms of what the then justices had said and how they were perceived in the media and so forth. Because it
Man,
was
that
it
that
was it's
that
quite,
IAC was like political guerrilla warfare, man. That movement
yeah, yeah,
came, it destroyed a government, and it went away. Went
yeah,
away. And
went
so the
away.
theories at that time that it was essentially a sung-based movement must be absolutely correct.
I don't even think it was, but I think there were organizations that may have done some, helped it local value. But the for me the most the thumb rule of IAC was IAC worked in Delhi and IAC did not work in Bombay. You go to Bombay, people, boss. If you don't have a minimum viable, if you don't have an MVP product, a maximum viable product that you can sell, Mumbaikars are not going to give a shit. And the reason why it worked in Delhi is a lot of these activists, your Prashant Bhushan, Kiran Bedis, all of these were Delhi-based activists, right? You take them. Anna Hazare is not a force to reckon with in Bombay. If you go to Bombay and
Yeah,
boss, you are
but
not.
The Commonwealth Games didn't happen in Bombay, right? We saw bridges collapsing, right? So
No,
for
no,
us,
no,
it was a
no. So no, that is a different thing. But I'm saying to channel all that anger into Lokpal and have sort of a single thing, it was not going to work. Second, it didn't help the fact that in Delhi, both the government and the opposition were not working at that time. Like Delhi BJP was not really liked. If Sheila Dikshit
it still
was
isn't.
hated
It's
in
still
Delhi,
rubbish. It's still
वो
absolutely
तो
rubbish.
वो तो है ही. I'm talking about then. I'm talking about 2011, like when they had selected Mr. Vijay Jolly to fight elections against Sheila Dikshit in 2013. So that's how seriously it was taken, right? In Bombay, the issue was completely different. Ki locally there were actually formations that were doing some work, and they were at fights with each other. So it's a very different. And Maharashtra now has changed, but it was essentially a Congress state. There has,
Mm.
amongst the biggest states of India, Maharashtra has been the most pro Congress state since independence, or since it was formed, since 1960.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So yeah, so that is there. And Mumbai has been a sort of a, there is a very famous joke that people would say that Bala Saheb Thackeray must have made a deal with Mr. Pawar that you take Maharashtra, give me Mumbai instead, and both happily coexisted for years and years because of that. But anyways, we are way over time. Nikhil, any closing comments and recommendations for our, if you have read, watched something very interesting lately, and any closing comments on cricket before you end? And we'll do a separate dedicated 1 hour on cricket.
Uh, I'm a bit of a curmudgeon when it comes to this stuff. So there was that movie Darlings that came out with Alia Bhatt
Yes.
and Vijay Varma, and I thought it was rubbish. Not rubbish. It was okay. It was all right.
It
Uh,
was too
it was
long,
all
yeah.
no, it's not too long. What I did not agree is people saying you've glorified domestic violence. It's the opposite. I thought it was a good dark satire. It just isn't
Yeah.
good enough, and she's a bit of a mixed bag now. I sort of fell out in my sort of appreciation of her. I think with that Gangubai
Yeah,
because
but
that
I
was
still think I'll only watch everything when with Shefali in it, because I'm a huge Shefali Shah admirer.
no, for she's no. I think Alia is also excellent. Generally excellent.
No, no,
Alia
I'm
is
saying
brilliant.
comparatively. Huh.
What I don't understand is what Ranbir Kapoor is doing, because I think he's a terrific actor. He's doing rubbish films, doing absolute rubbish. I don't know why he's doing this.
Picking the wrong directors, picking friends over scripts,
Possibly,
unfortunately.
possibly, possibly.
Something his father, the outspoken Rishi Kapoor, had said multiple times.
And then there's, of course, our poor man Amir,
Yeah.
who's
I,
there's some of the there are clips floating around. I haven't seen the film, but there are, and not because I'm boycotting it. Let me be crystal clear. I don't believe in boycotting. Uh, I have not watched an Amir film in a theater since Lagan, because from that point onward, at some point, he became very sanctimonious in my eye, and I just didn't enjoy the guy as much as I used to.
yeah.
But that's not to say he hasn't made good films. Like Tare Zameen Par was a really good film, but he's more of a sideshow in that film,
Yeah.
right? Then
Three
Three
Idiots
Idiots,
was a
I
good
was
watchable
okay.
film. It's an entertaining film. Like I
So
won't like it
Three
has its
Idiots is kind
flaws.
of the same genre as say Munna Bhai, and I think Munna Bhai is an infinitely superior film,
Oh, absolutely, infinitely
right?
superior.
Dangal, I think, was good but not great. But again, I enjoyed it because the focus is on the girls and their wrestling and all of
Yeah.
that. Uh, yeah. So I'm not that enthused by him, but I've seen those clips of his acting in this, and he's trying to play a mentally deficient character. He's just so over the top with some of these scenes. I'm
Not
like,
just that, not just that. What I hate is, and I'm a huge Forrest Gump. This morning I was watching Forrest Gump clips, right? That famous Baba Gump Shrimp Company, which actually is a restaurant. It got so popular after the movie. It's headquartered in Houston, and there are 40 restaurants across US. They're called Baba Gump Shrimp Company, and most people don't know that it actually came from
no,
this.
that's the problem. I mean, Forrest Gump I liken Forrest Gump to the song "We Didn't Start the Fire," right? Because they're
Yeah,
both a history lesson. They're both an excellent history lesson. Forrest Gump's an excellent history lesson about America till the release of the film, pretty much till
yeah,
the release of the film, right?
yeah,
And why is he chosen to be an idiot? And why does he go to Vietnam? And why is that of significance? Because that was the recruitment policy of the U.S. Army at
yeah.
that time. They were called McNamara's
And
morons.
yeah,
But
exactly. I hate that term, but that was the
cannot
term. McNamara's
translate
moron.
that straight away to the Indian army. It doesn't work
Yeah.
that way. The
I
Indian
mean,
army
not just
doesn't.
that. He had Lieutenant Dan, whom he saved from Vietnam, and they have cast a Pakistani actor, and they are selling chaddis. I mean, what? Like what?
Okay, I don't know what that is. This sounds really
Yeah,
odd to me. I don't know what this is.
yeah, because Baba wanted to do a shrimp business. They have cast that Balaraju, whatever, instead of Baba, who wants to do a chaddi business, who just views at underwear everywhere. And they went. I have not seen the movie, but I have had friends who've seen the movie, and I've read reviews, and they've cast like some in war. He meets a Pakistani guy. Is he Pakistani? I don't know, like who it is. That's the tweets I saw. But my point is, forget all that. Like you cannot Forrest Gump worked because he caused those historic events. He was a guard at the Watergate. Because of him, this happened. Because of him, he goes to Abby Hoffman and makes this speech, weird speech, right? There are a lot of events. Here, Lal Singh Chadda, from what I read, he's a bystander at all these events. He's not causing these events, right? So it's a very lazy adaptation rather than being a cause of an event and doing this. And forget all that. The ultimate thing is when you take a source material, you're not the whole thing is not that you copy it frame by frame. You take the soul of the movie, and the soul of the film is his relationship with these women in his life, his mother, Jenny, and so forth, and how he very nonchalantly, the Forrest Gump is essentially an exercise in butterfly effect. देखिए एक छोटी छोटी चीज and how magnificent things change, right? And I don't think they've captured that thing. But what I want to
No, I haven't seen
recommend.
it yet. Listen, I'm a huge fan of Kareena Kapoor. I think she's a really good actress. A really good actress. So I'm sure she'll be very good in the film.
Yeah, also I'm not a fan of Jenny in Forrest Gump, so I think anything will be better than that. I love Robin Wright. I've loved everything she's done since, but I think
Really,
Forrest
I've
Gump
never
is
been a fan of Robin Wright. What has she done? Other than
House of
Golden Globe?
Cards. House of Cards.
Oh, that came very late in her career.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
very late.
but no, that's my point, right? So her previous
No,
Avatar
no. So
and
let
her
me put it this way to you: at the time at which she's doing Forrest Gump, you don't understand why Robin Wright is in Forrest Gump. Like, I mean, she is
oh
not
yeah,
as
yes.
significant an actress at that time as she may be after, say, House of Cards.
After the but one last thing I want to leave us with is my recommendation. I watched a show called Gaslit, and if it's available in India, you guys should watch it with Julia Roberts. It's basically told from the perspective of Martha Mitchell, the wife of John Mitchell, who was the Attorney General during Watergate, and basically was leading the committee to re-elect Richard Nixon, and how Watergate happened. And it's told from people who are in the seven people who sort of created Nixon and the whole Watergate conspiracy and what happened. It's a fantastic show. Like it's essentially a political thriller. You exactly know what's going to happen, but I did not know Martha Mitchell was doing this, and Julia Roberts is just back in form, hitting all those spots she did as an actor all those years ago. And Sean Penn plays John Mitchell, which I couldn't even recognize Sean Penn for the first 30 minutes. That's the amount of makeup and voice modulation that he's done. Like, he's just brilliant. If they don't both
So
win the
if you're
award this
recommending,
year,
I don't know if you guys get Z5 in the US.
yeah, we do.
Okay, so Z5 has a loose adaptation on, if you guys remember Bihar politics of the 90s and 2000s, there used to be a Muhammad Shahabuddin who was the enforcer of
Absolutely,
Lalu.
yeah.
It's called Rangbaz. It's loosely based
Rangbaz.
on Muhammad Shahabuddin's life.
Yeah,
And
and is it very good?
Rangbaz actually is a series. I think they've done it on other such characters as well, gangland characters. Very well
Hmm.
made. And it's actually more than very well made. The guy who plays Muhammad Shahabuddin's character, adaptation of that character, he's acted
Hmm.
really well. He's a very restrained, good actor.
Absolutely. No, I think it just came out last year, right? I think, or this year, I think. So
I have no idea. It's my wife who discovers this stuff. I have no idea. I just sort of put my eyeballs, man. That's my job.
absolutely. No, that's a fantastic recommendation. Chalo, we'll watch it for sure. Thank you so much, Nikhil. You've been very kind with your time. Thank you. We went a little
Sure.
bit overboard, but always a fun
That's
discussion.
fine. That's fine.
And
That's fine.
guys, please share, follow, like, subscribe. We'll be back with more, and stay tuned next week for a new episode of Mind Podcast. Till then, it's goodbye, and thank you so much for joining, Nikhil.